So here's a pretty blunt question. Is Europe getting left in the dust in the global race for the future? That's the core issue our source material tackles today. So let's jump right in and unpack this whole idea of an innovation crisis. Okay, so let's set the stage. What we're talking about here is a super high-stakes competition. This isn't just about economics. It's a full-on global sprint for tech dominance. And right in the middle of it all, artificial intelligence. The big question is, who are the key players on the field? Now, this is where it gets really interesting. This slide lays out a pretty stark characterization, and it comes straight from our source. You've got the United States, right? The land of Silicon Valley, known for pure innovation. Then you have China, which is just incredible at scaling things up at lightning speed. And then there's Europe, and its specialty, according to the source, bureaucracy, basically regulating and taxing stuff. So you have to ask, how did Europe end up in that category? Well, the central argument from the source is that this isn't because of some outside force. The problem is mostly of its own making. You could almost call it a self-inflicted wound. Okay, so if the problems are coming from the inside, what exactly is it that's holding Europe back? Well, the source material offers a pretty clear diagnosis on that front. Well, investor Kevin O'Leary, he definitely doesn't pull any punches. He offers this really blunt verdict, basically arguing that after the war, Europe shifted into this super heavy regulatory mode. And that, he says, just choked the life out of the continent's innovative spirit, making all the best and brightest want to leave. And this table really shows you the contrast the source is talking about. You've got the EU model on one side, which is all about regulation and high taxes. And on the other, you've got this UAE model as a counterpoint. It's pro-business, pro-innovation, with a simple 9% tax rate. And the results? Well, they speak for themselves. One model sees its innovators pack up and leave, while the other is a magnet for capital and talent. All right, so that's the theory. But what about the proof? Let's get into the hard data and actually look at the numbers the source provides to try and quantify this so-called innovation gap. So yeah, let's try to put a number on this. Just how massive is the gulf between the tech scene in the United States and what's happening in Europe? Honestly, the scale of this is just staggering. I mean, look at this chart. America's biggest tech giants are valued in the $3 to $4 trillion range. Trillion with a T. Now compare that to Europe's biggest publicly traded company. It's sitting at around 550 billion. That's not just a gap, that's a whole different universe. And you know what the real kicker is? This isn't a new problem. The source makes a point of saying that people at global forums like Davos were complaining about the exact same things years ago. It feels like we're stuck in a loop, having the same conversation over and over again with no real progress. So what are the actual hurdles on the ground? Well, the source points to what's basically a perfect storm of problems. You've got crazy high energy costs. It's super expensive just to do business. You've got this tangled mess of different regulations across 27 countries. And what happens? You can't attract the big-time investment you need to grow. But here's where things get a little more complicated, and we need to add some nuance. Because it's a huge mistake to just paint the entire continent of Europe with the same brush. The source argues that Europe is actually really divided, with completely different ways of thinking about business and the future. Yeah, the source draws this really sharp line between what it calls old Europe, think Brussels and France, and new Europe, like Poland and other nations from the former Soviet bloc. Old Europe is described as being bogged down by bureaucracy, a culture where everything shuts down in August. But new Europe is painted as vibrant, hungry for investment, and importantly, made up of people who know what socialism looks like up close and want nothing to do with it. And this quote really gets to the heart of the frustration. It paints this picture of a bureaucratic class in Brussels, people who had a golden spoon, who've never really had to build a business. Yet they're the ones coming up with these incredibly complex rules that are seen as the ultimate enemy of innovation and progress. And this is where that split we talked about turns into real action. Countries like Poland, for example, are apparently carving out their own path. They're seen as actively moving away from that central EU bureaucracy in Brussels, which shows that, hey, maybe there's another way to do things inside the continent itself. So all of this brings us to the big final question. When you look at Europe, are you looking at a fixer-upper or a lost cause? The source material really lays out two completely different visions for what the future might hold.
So on the one hand, you have the optimistic take, which is summed up pretty well by Senator Marco Rubio here.
It's a call to action, right? Let's unshackle our creativity. Let's form a new Western alliance, and let's go build the next century on the frontiers of tech and space.
But then you have the pessimistic view, and it's a powerful one. Has that ship already sailed? I mean, given how fast AI is moving and how far behind Europe seems to be, you have to ask, is it just too late to catch up? Is that innovation gap now just too wide to cross? And that right there brings us to the provocative question at the very heart of this whole debate. Is Europe a fixer-upper? You know, a place with great bones that just needs a massive renovation? Or has the future, which is all about speed and innovation, already packed its bags and left it behind? It's a massive question, and the answer is going to shape the rest of our century.